Hi, I'm Arati, and today we're discussing everything acrylic inks. In this video, we'll define what acrylic ink is. I'll show you the brands I use and the colors I have, swatching out each one. I'll show you the materials that I use on top of acrylic inks as well as some mediums. And I'll show you exactly how I use them in my work, both finished work as well as sketchbook practice, and the things I'm working on currently. This is a much requested video, so there are also a few subscriber questions that I will be answering throughout the course of this video. If you have any further questions, pop them down in the comments below. Before we start, a little disclaimer. I am an artist, I have a lot of art supplies. You do not need this many art supplies. I started with just 5 colors, a blue, a pink, a yellow, a black, and a white. This is a mixing set. You can mix any color with these. So if you do want to start with acrylic inks, start with these 5. I will pop all the affiliate links down in the description box below. But just remember that the best art supplies to use are the ones you already have that you don't use. Use those first. Your work may change with the addition of these art supplies, but it won't improve without consistent practice. Let's get on with what are acrylic inks. Essentially, acrylic inks are a fluid acrylic paint. The word ink just comes from the viscosity of this because they come usually in these little bottles with a dropper. So you can actually drop the ink out onto your page or onto a palette or however you want to use them. The ink describes the viscosity of this medium. You can just apply it by itself. You can mix it with other colors, obviously, and you can also dilute it both with water as well as other mediums in order to create different effects. I could mix in another color on the page, or I could do that on a palette and then blend the colors together. With acrylic ink, paper does matter. So here's acrylic ink there, and that has bled through this paper. This is a Sea White of Brighton sketchbook with cartridge paper in it. And then this one hasn't bled through that much. So it really depends on the paper as well as the kind of ink that you're using. One of my subscriber questions was, what is the difference between regular acrylic paint and acrylic inks? Here's a sheet on which I've put all the different kinds of acrylic paints: heavy body, soft body, acrylic gouache, and 2 samples of ink, one dark and one relatively light. Now, heavy body acrylic is thick acrylic paint. It's pretty solid, it has a high color load, and you can spread it around kind of like butter or maybe like liquid plaster. It will stand up in peaks and you can create a lot of texture with this. Soft body acrylics are softer than heavy body acrylics. So heavy body acrylics with the addition of more medium is just a different texture. So this one is thick and this one is soft and more pliable. It spreads much more easily and it does give you a different texture than the heavy body acrylic does. Acrylic gouache is a whole different thing entirely. It is still acrylic paint, but it's been blended with a really matte medium. So when you put it down, it has none of this shine of acrylic paint that you normally get with most acrylic paints. Some have less, some have more, depends on the brand and their formula. When you put ink down, it's very liquid and it has much more of a shine, I have found, than either heavy body or soft body acrylic. So when you put these down, they are really, really flowy and you can do a lot because they are so flowy. It's basically as if you added a whole bunch of water to heavy body. But in acrylic, if you add water, I mean, this is some sciencey thing, but it kind of breaks down the particles or whatever. Please, somebody correct me with the actual terms in the comments. It breaks it down and it doesn't adhere as much to whatever surface you're working on. So you use mediums instead of water. So that's if you really watered down heavy body acrylic. Each of these, heavy body, soft body, and acrylic gouache, can be mixed with fluid matte medium to make acrylic ink. All it's really doing is adding more liquid into these paints to bring them to the viscosity of the ink. I'll show you exactly how I mix fluid matte medium in order to make heavy body, soft body, and acrylic gouache more liquid. I'm just going to use the example of the heavy body. You pop some of the heavy body acrylic onto a palette, or you can do this in a cup or other container of some sort. Sometimes I refill these bottles by doing this method, and I also pop them into empty pump markers like this, which I've shown you in my DIY markers video before, which I will link for you down in the description box below. By adding different amounts of fluid matte medium, you can get different viscosity of the paint. Now, don't try and create acrylic ink using water. First of all, the water will evaporate at some point and then you'll be left with thick acrylic paint. And also then it won't or may not adhere to whatever surface you put it on because of the nature of acrylic. The more fluid matte medium you add, the more liquidy or more fluid the acrylic paint becomes, and therefore it transforms into ink. Now, each brand of acrylic ink has a different sort of thickness, which I will come to in a minute when I show you the swatches. But it really depends on what you want to do with it. If you want to use it with a brush, a palette knife, put it in a bottle so that it can be used with a pipette, or put it in an acrylic marker, you can change the viscosity of it according to your needs. One of the other questions that was asked by a subscriber was their ink seems to be drying up or coagulating slightly. That has happened to my indigo ink. It is much thicker than some of my other inks, but it also depends on how you store them. Like Liquitex, for example, when you've left it for a long time, it settles at the bottom of the bottle and you have to shake it in order to get it back to that thickness. And it's much thinner than some of my other inks, particularly the Daler-Rowney FW inks. Keep in mind, this is acrylic, so if you leave the bottle open, it's going to dry up. Don't leave them open for long. You can use a stay wet palette, or you can use a glass palette like I'll show you later in this video. I find it easier to store my acrylic inks in the bottle that they came in. I don't transfer them into a palette because they will dry up, or into other bottles unless I'm mixing a specific color. So here's how I store them. In a spinning carousel, or Lazy Susan as they're sometimes called. I keep it on the shelf within reach so that I can spin it around and take out any bottles I want, or I can put it on my table and it's easy to access. I'm quite a short person, so I can't really reach across the table when I'm sitting down. And this makes it a bit easier to get bottles in and out. And I can just spin it around when I need something on the other side and pop it out again. I like to keep my stuff organized so that I can find things when I need them. And this shelf has all of my art supplies that I use on a regular basis, as well as some stuff on my table. Let's have a look at some of the brands that I'm going to swatch for you in a minute. I started off with Daler-Rowney. I can't remember where I picked these up, but I think I got them from Cass Art, and I picked up those 5 mixing colors and started off with that. Since then, I've progressed to getting some convenience colors, and these are the colors I now work with on a regular basis. So Daler-Rowney, really good basic ink. I do find some of them thicken up after a little while, but really nice and good range of colors as well. Next is Liquitex. These are not my favorite inks. I find them really, really thin. I have, in my experience, found that they lift up a little bit when I'm painting over them with other inks. They take longer to dry, in my opinion. I mean, your experience may have been slightly different, but that's how I feel about them. Speed Dry Magic Color is a new to me brand. I've only got 2 colors of these, and you would have seen them in my haul video from a couple of videos ago. I like them so far, and if they come out with any colors that are not included in any of the other brands I have, I might get some more. Schmincke Aero Color, I believe, was designed to work in airbrushes. I really love these colors. First of all, they have a really nice selection of shades. They also have a super coverage range, and they dry really well. They are also square, so they don't roll around like some of the other bottles do. Amsterdam inks, new to me, because when I went to Great Art, that was the first time I really saw them. I have my Great Art shop tour linked down below for you. I find that the opacity of these is really, really good. Very similar to the Daler-Rowney, but different. Then I've got Golden. These are high flow acrylics. They are essentially acrylic ink, but they've just been named by Golden as high flow acrylics. I guess that's just the way they want to do it. I do find that these are more opaque than the rest of them. And this is pretty much, I think, the regular Golden acrylic mixed with that fluid matte medium, which you can see is also the same Golden brand. They come in these bottles, and they also come in a larger size. I have extras in white. I run through a lot of white. The final brand that I have is the Holbein acrylic ink. I only have the super opaque white. The Daler-Rowney also does come in a bigger bottle. I'm not sure that they have all the colors in this large size, but I only got the white because, like I said, I go through it a lot. And it has this handy dandy little squeezer thing on the right hand side, so it's really easy to fill my acrylic ink pens as well. All of these brands I've swatched out for you, and let's go through them one by one. If you're not into swatching, please skip ahead to the next section. These are all the colors of acrylic inks that I currently own, and I mix between them and use them as needed. I've popped a little swatch of Posca Black on the right hand side of each section so that you can see exactly how opaque the ink is. The ink does look less opaque when you're applying it, and much more so when it's dry. The first one we'll swatch is Golden Acrylic in Titan Buff. Then we have Daler-Rowney FW Inks in White 011. Not so opaque when dry, but a good mixing color. Liquitex in Titanium White. Like I said, Liquitex doesn't dry fully, and here it's taken some of the Posca with it. Let's pop up here for a moment with Golden Titanium White and the Holbein Super Opaque White. As you can see, the Super Opaque White is not super opaque, at least in my experience, no matter how much I shake the bottle. but multiple coats will make it super opaque. Schmincke Aero Color in Brilliant Yellow. This is one of the total cover range and it is pretty opaque. It does require multiple coats. I use this a lot for mixing and it gives a nice golden hue. So let's move on to Daler-Rowney FW Inks in Process Yellow. This is one of the first colors I got. It's quite translucent. It's excellent for mixing because it is translucent. So you can mix multiple colors. Amsterdam Acrylics Naples Yellow Deep. Quite matte, but also fairly opaque when applied in multiple layers. Daler-Rowney FW Inks in Indian Yellow 643. This is much shinier than some of the other acrylic inks, at least when dry. Golden in Yellow Oxide. Good color, fairly opaque because these are high flow and they don't define them as acrylic inks, but technically they are. Amsterdam in Azo Orange 276. Very translucent color, but a lovely pop of orange. It's not quite fluorescent, but it's pretty close. Schmincke Aero Color in Naphthol Orange, total cover. Again, you can see it's so much more opaque than some of the other inks. Schmincke Aero Color in Terra Rosa, one of my favorite colors. I've mixed it into a lot of things to give it a bit more depth. For example, if you mix this into the Process Magenta, it makes a beautiful pink. Amsterdam Naples Yellow Red Light 292. Another lovely color. Has quite a lot of white in it, so it is a bit more chalky than some of the other colors. Amsterdam Quinacridone Rose 366. Again, as I said, Amsterdam is a little bit more opaque than some of the other inks. For example, the Daler-Rowney FW Inks in Process Magenta, very translucent ink. Daler-Rowney FW Inks in Crimson. This is a convenient red, and when added to white, does make a nice pink. Liquitex Red Oxide. I think I also have a pan pastel in a similar color. Daler-Rowney FW Inks in Red Earth. Beautiful color, wonderful for trees and earth. Amsterdam in Burnt Umber. Useful mixing color. This is number 409. And also the Daler-Rowney FW Inks in Sepia. I use these two in combination quite a lot. The Schmincke Aero Sepia in 603 is almost black. It's really, really dark. And I love this for details. It's not as brown as the Daler-Rowney FW Inks one, but it's a beautiful brown nonetheless. Black, self-explanatory, pretty good color, and it's a pretty dark black. I can't even see where the Posca was underneath this. Payne's Grey from Daler-Rowney FW Inks. Number 065, you can see the bluishness of this here. It's not a warm Payne's Grey, it's a cool one. Golden in N5 Neutral Grey, very versatile, very useful color. I use it so much. Speed Dry Magic Color in Mink Grey, you would have seen this in my haul a couple of weeks ago. Fairly opaque and a nice color. Amsterdam Warm Grey, this, and this, all three of them are great shadow colors and also to dull down any color you want. Like if you mix it into the Amsterdam Quinacridone Rose, you could get a kind of muddy pink color. Liquitex Muted Grey, great color. Rarely use it because it doesn't stay permanent, at least in my experience. Amsterdam Grayish Blue, beautiful color. Also, I use it as shadows and as a mixing color. It's kind of like a lighter version of the Payne's Grey with a lot of white added in. Liquitex in Muted Turquoise. Again, I don't use it much because, as I said, I'm not a huge fan of the Liquitex acrylic inks. I do like their acrylic gouache and their regular acrylic paint though. Daler-Rowney FW Inks in Process Cyan. This one, the magenta and the Process Yellow were a part of my first purchase of inks. Schmincke Aero in Indigo, number 400. Very much a purpley kind of tone to this blue. Really lovely. Daler-Rowney FW Inks in Indigo. This is my preferred indigo color because it's kind of like a true indigo. But this one has thickened. Out of all my inks, this one has really thickened and kind of become gloopy inside. I did add a little bit of that fluid matte medium to help with that. Speed Dry in Grecian Olive. All of my greens are very much in the olive sap green range because that's the kind of green that I like. This is Grecian Olive MC390. Very much opaque. Amsterdam in Olive Green Deep 622. I have two of these for some reason. I must have just accidentally bought another one. Very opaque again. Nice deep green. Schmincke Aero in Olive Green is much more a warm color than the Amsterdam or the Speed Dry Grecian Olive. So it's a little bit more yellowy. Golden Sap Green Hue, lovely color. Again, more opaque because it is one of their high flow rather than a traditional acrylic ink as they define it. Liquitex Sap Green. Again, you can see the Liquitex is so watery. I really am not a fan of it. Again, a yellowy green, more viridianish than sap green, I would say. So those are all my colors. You do not need all of these. Please keep that in mind. You only need mixing colors, if at all. Circling back to the question of the materials that you can use on top of acrylic ink or with acrylic ink, one of the ways in which you can use it is directly on top of acrylic ink. The problem with this, however, is that not all materials work equally well on top of the acrylic ink. So in order to mitigate that, you can use matte medium. So the matte medium removes the shine of the acrylic ink and makes it easier for other materials to grip to that surface a little bit more. Things don't really stick to shiny stuff like this, but when you have matte medium, materials can sometimes perform better. So you can see like the pencil definitely performs a little bit better on the matte medium versus the plain acrylic inks here. I've also got a darker color so you can see how they replicate on this. And I've also got them on acrylic gouache, soft body and heavy body. Super matte medium is one of my absolute favorite mediums. It's by Golden again, and it just makes everything, like it says, super, super matte. So I can't find any difference between acrylic gouache here, this, and the super matte medium when applied on top of almost any other material. This is my favorite way to use it because all of the materials work way better when I have super matte medium over acrylic ink, and I use it in multiple layers. So I'll put down some acrylic ink, I'll put down some super matte medium, I'll put other mediums on top, then I'll put some more acrylic ink, then I'll add some more super matte medium over the top. It also helps it not to stick together as pages in my sketchbook if you use matte medium or super matte medium over whatever you've done. Gloss, sometimes plain acrylic ink can like stick to itself within a sketchbook, even if you put a sheet of deli paper or whatever in the middle. Now gloss medium is something I don't use a lot of. I only got a small bottle to try. It just creates glossy effect, more glossy than the actual acrylic ink. And not a lot of mediums work very well on it. You can see the pencil barely worked at all. And then the fourth one is clear gesso, which creates a texture. I don't know if you can really hear this because my mic does cut off background sound. If you look at the difference between the way the pencil has worked here and the way that it works on the clear gesso, this is more a sandpapery kind of feeling. See how well the pastels work as opposed to the super matte medium, or indeed any of the other mediums. It creates more of a texture, so you can use that for that. But it will wear down your materials quicker because it takes more of the material. So I generally stick with super matte medium unless I want a particular effect, and then I use clear gesso. It just gives the tooth back to your paper a little bit. When I was showing the materials that I use on top of all of these mediums, I did a graphite pencil, a color pencil, some markers, some pastels. And you can see here exactly how each of them has worked. Now I've got here a Posca brush pen. And you can see how that works on each of these. So if I pop it straight across the acrylic ink there, and the acrylic ink here, the acrylic gouache, the soft body acrylic, and the heavy body, which, well, it's cream, so it's not going to be that effective. You can see here exactly how it performs on each. It's much better on the super matte than even on the matte or the plain acrylic, and it's much clearer line. Now, like I said, paper matters. This is just regular cartridge paper. It's not the best paper to use acrylic ink on, but let me take out a few different papers and show you in real time exactly how paper affects the use of acrylic ink. I've got here a selection of the more popular sketchbooks that I've seen people use, and maybe a couple that you haven't seen before. Let's start first with a scrap piece of watercolor paper. This is the Art brand, but you could pretty much use any watercolor paper. This is cold pressed, but I prefer to use hot pressed generally. But both work equally well. I feel like this is the best surface that I have found for using acrylic ink on. It's very consistent, and you'll see how it lays on the surface of the paper in just a moment. I've popped out a few different brands here. So there's the Liquitex, the Magic Color, the Golden, the Dalerani FW inks, the Amsterdam, and the Aerocolor. I don't mind if they mix together because that's how I use them. I like to use a glass palette. This is just a piece of glass out of an old frame that I've put tape on the edges so I don't cut myself. And you would have seen earlier in the video where I was using that grayish white palette. I use those interchangeably. One is larger than the other. And I also occasionally use a Stay Wet palette, but this is my preferred way of using these inks. So let's do this on the watercolor paper. You can see the ink stays on the surface quite a lot. It doesn't absorb as easily. Let's just use a few different brands here. And you can see that they're really mixing quite well. It stays on the surface. It stays wet a little bit longer. I also like to kind of scrub it with my finger to get a little bit of a different texture. And mixy, mixy, mixy. And you can see this is already almost dried. So the thinner the layer that you apply, the quicker it dries. And then you can just apply paint on top of that. And it does keep a line pretty well. Like so. You can also like use the back of your brush to scratch into it. Like if you're doing grass or something like that, that works really well. And then once it's dry, you can use other mediums as well on it. So I find that this is the best surface to get the best out of these acrylic inks. You can see that they're already drying pretty quickly, and you can mitigate this by adding some more medium or retardant, things like that, which I don't really use, but you could use them. They do exist. So like this is almost dry. The Liquitex doesn't really fully dry, but that's pretty good. I really like the textures of things, and then you can go over them like that. Yeah. A little bit later on, I'll show you work that I've done on similar paper. Next, because it's the smallest in the pile, let's go with the Etcher. I think this is the Everyday Sketchbook. This is an A6 size, and I've been using it for general plein air sketches. On this paper, because it's watercolor paper, the ink stays on the surface and doesn't really go through onto the next page. So that's an advantage. I sometimes wipe the brush off like this to get excess paint off when I'm switching colors. This is such a lovely color palette though, isn't it? That, and then the darkest. And then the pink. Gone a bit muddy, so let's wash our brush. Pink. And then the Terra Rose thingy. Beautiful paper again to work with. I'm not a huge fan of it. It's very soft, and I don't like the way that pencils work on top of this. I find that this paper isn't for me. Loads of people do love it though. And it works really well, stays wet fairly long. Pretty good. And in comparison to this, obviously this is dried already. Pretty even surface. So this is cold press and this is hot pressed watercolor paper. Next up, the ever popular Royal Talent sketchbook. This is the white paper sketchbook. This absorbs the ink. So when you put it down, it does not stay on the surface as long and almost immediately absorbs. Can you see here? It's creating this kind of texture here because it's already dried and already absorbed into the paper. This dries really quickly. It can give you a nice texture, but if you're experimenting for the first time with acrylic inks, this is not going to give you a true reveal of what acrylic inks are like. And then if you add a little bit of water, it really gives you that texture because it's absorbed the entire thing. Like you can hardly see any shine on it because it's like absorbed it, and you can see it's almost coming through on the back. And then the more you scrub on this paper with it, the more it absorbs. But there is one thing that kind of helps. Once you put down acrylic ink on this paper, it's then got a protective layer. So any subsequent layer that you put down on top of the acrylic will not get absorbed into the paper. So once this has dried, it's almost dried, if you put this color down, it gives you a much truer representation of acrylic ink. Like that. See? The difference between the first coat and the second coat is massive. The second coat doesn't absorb because it's already got a layer of acrylic underneath it, so you won't get the same effect. It's a very interesting medium to use on different papers. You get very, very different work. Next is the Pitt sketchbook. These are super popular sketchbooks and they work really well for acrylic ink. In fact, some of the work I'll show you later is in my Pitt sketchbook. Absorbs the ink a little bit, but not as much as the Royal Talons, but it doesn't keep it as wet as the watercolor paper does, but still does a great job of acrylic ink. And again, as I said, once you've applied the acrylic ink, it creates a layer of acrylic underneath, so it then doesn't absorb any further. And then since they haven't fully dried, you can then mix in over that as well. This sketchbook in which I showed you these acrylic inks first is the Sea White of Brighton sketchbook. It's cartridge paper, so it's much more absorbent. The acrylic ink really does go straight through. It does happen on the Royal Talons as well, but it really happens on this a lot. So I don't really use acrylic ink on this unless I'm putting a coat of gesso down or something, or you can put a coat of acrylic down and then work on top of that. But I love the textures that it gives. So sometimes I'll just do a background on this and then work over the top of that. So since we've already got this here, the acrylic ink applied plain, right? And then acrylic ink applied on top of other acrylic ink. You get such a clear line because it's already dried and there's already a coating of acrylic on the bottom. So now it performs much more like it would on the watercolor paper because you've already got a coat of acrylic over the bottom of it. Hope this is making sense. If there are any questions, please do ask me. This is the Odd Orange sketchbook. This uses Bristol paper And I generally use it for watercolor because it behaves like hot press watercolor paper, but you can use it for mixed media and acrylic as well. The super thin Liquitex doesn't go through at all and has a nice texture. It's very smooth paper like the pith, so you will get brush lines and things like that, but then if you work over it over and over again, some of that will go. It's lovely paper though, so nice. All of these swatches are turning out brown, but that's because I'm not washing my brush. Apologies. Beautiful paper. And you can see it's staying quite wet, so you can work into it much more easily. You can do lines, you can do checks, especially if you're doing like a pattern or something. You can do grass. Yeah, very versatile. And finally, we have the Jackson's own brand sketchbook. This is the lay flat sketchbook, and it's done by Kunst and Papier. It is thin paper, so it is only 100 GSM paper, and it's very matte. So you can see it's like really thin and it's really absorbent. So when I put acrylic paint down on this, it immediately goes through the paper. It's dry. It's already dry. Like there is no way that you can like reactivate this ink. So put it down and it's already gone in the paper. It's just so absorbent. So you can get really different effects with this, but you have to be aware of this fact. Once again, once it's dry, you can go over it with paint and it won't absorb because you've already got that base down, right? The first coat kind of acts as a medium or a gesso almost and creates a barrier between the paper and your brush. So when you apply the second coat, you actually get color, whereas when you apply the first coat, it just soaks straight into the paper. It can create really nice effects, like I've done this background and it's really matte. I don't even need any matte medium on this to work on top of this in pencil. You can also use canvas. I haven't done so. I use acrylic paint on canvas, but I haven't done it so in a long time. You can also use it on panels. Again, this will probably be another video because I have panels, but I haven't actually worked on them yet. There can be a fair bit of wastage when you're using acrylic inks, but when I'm using acrylic inks, particularly on a glass palette, there are two things that I do. One is I have a spare sketchbook on the side. Every time I'm working, if I need to clean my brush, I clean it off on a page like this. These pages are made entirely with leftover acrylic ink. Or in the Pith sketchbook, pages like this are created with just leftover ink. In order to clean my palettes, I use a glass scraper then to carefully take off any of the excess ink and then bin it. I wait until whatever ink is left over is dry. Sometimes I do forget and some of the ink does dry, but that happens, life happens, and you forget about the inks. I don't like for acrylic ink to go down the sink, obviously that's not good, and your paint water also needs to be emptied responsibly. Golden has a good article about this, and so does Jackson's, I believe. I haven't recorded a lot of the work that I've done in acrylic ink because I'm kind of in the flow and I don't put the camera on. This particular piece I have recorded some of the process, so I can explain to you exactly how I go about working with acrylic inks, particularly in my sketchbook, developing an idea, working over it with different mediums. The full video for this sketchbook and the work I've done in it with acrylic inks will be up in my Patreon at the end of the month as part of one of my sketchbook process videos. I started off on this page with one of those leftover pages of inks, of which there are several in this book. I often use tailor's chalk or some sort of removable material, not pencils because you'll have to erase them, but chalk like this. You can draw on top of something and then just erase that with your hand and it disappears. And it also disappears when you put a wet medium on top of it. So I sketch out my plan and then I start to add acrylic ink and I start to layer and I start to just build the image. There's no rhyme or reason to this. It's just the way in which I work. And I'm just thinking as I'm going and planning as I go. Sometimes I do a preliminary sketch and sometimes I don't. In this, because it's a sketchbook, I'm just working out an idea based on things that I've already seen. I'm not really working from a reference photo, but I am working from my own life experience of a cemetery that I went to in Hampstead. Once I've done the base layer of ink, I then add a coat of super matte medium over the top and I go off to do whatever I need to do while it dries. When I come back, I then add other things on top. I add more acrylic ink, I add pencils, Jelly Roll Sakura pen in the white areas. It's not finished and it won't be for a while, but you can see the outlines of where I've added pencil and added more detail. And I can go over this again with super matte medium, cover everything. Keep in mind that you won't be able to amend the pencil once you've put it down and then put super matte medium over it, but you can always paint over it and then amend it that way. So that's generally my process. And now let me show you some of the work I've done with acrylic inks. The next page in this is also another work in progress. You can see here I've used Posca pen to create these shapes, and I've used the base as a ground, adding more dark ink over this section in order to make it stand out a little bit more. And I'm using negative shapes in order to get my silhouettes done. This is a work in progress. It'll just keep going. Here's another page where I was practicing frogs in Emma Carlisle's session with London Drawing Group, just adding different materials. I think there's some pan pastel in this, as well as, yeah, there's pan pastel around it, which you can see if it comes off a little bit, as well as pencils. And then here's a piece that I was experimenting with. I often work in multiple sketchbooks. So I have a sheet of paper here where I was working on the same idea. And then I have a larger scale sketchbook here where, again, I was working on the same idea, but I was working on multiple sketchbooks and sheets at the same time, trying to kind of work out an idea in order to just experiment, to fiddle about and see if something worked or if it didn't. Some cases it did, like this one was too stiff, but I really like some of the texture that I got in the background. This one, I really liked how the suns came out and the background came out, but everything else was a bit too loosey-goosey. And I really liked how the fog came out on this. So it's a nice way to experiment. While one thing is drying, you can work on another, and so get a number of different things. This is why a lot of my work is spread out over multiple sketchbooks, and I never really finish a full sketchbook very often, particularly with my own work, because I'm working like this. This Pitt sketchbook also has another piece that I did in acrylic inks. It has a little bit of collage as well with that indigo acrylic ink, which is a little bit thicker than the rest. But some of this is collage, like the dog bits, and the little person is also collage. I think I've stuck it down quite a lot. Yeah. So that is also collage. Coming back to this sketchbook, like I said, I have some of these pages prepared. So if I go back to the beginning of the sketchbook, I worked on those prepared pages in a Zoom session, drawing cats and adding acrylic over the top, adding pencil. Here's another page and another one with that same background, working on top of it. Here's a blank one, more dogs, and then there's these as well. This was another Emma Carlisle session. Quite pleased with them. I'm working towards acrylic landscapes with dogs, as you can see from the other Pitt sketchbook. But yeah, really nice way to work with texture and add scratching and add a little bit more detail in with acrylic inks. I've made some final artwork, but most of the work I've done with acrylic inks hasn't been finished. I'm just a very slow worker, and I like to take my time with things and put them away and think about them for a bit and then come back to them. But this was Folktale Week that I did 2 years ago, and the whole story for this is on my Patreon, so I will link that down for you below. And all of it is acrylic inks in a very limited palette. Few colors to create the entire thing. This is one of my favorite pieces. But you can see I've used matte medium on most of it, and then I've used acrylic over the top, so you can see the shiny bits are still there. And then this one. The only thing with acrylic ink is very translucent, so I wanted to cover up that path, but I couldn't fully do it. I probably will redo this piece if I ever do something with this. Yeah, so this whole series was done with just a limited palette and color pencil over the top. So that would probably be the only completed project that I've done with acrylic inks. But the other thing I also do sometime is abstract work like this and put it in, I think I did a whole sheet and then I cut it up just to see how the shapes would work like this. It's just experimental stuff, fiddling about with things. And I've also got a couple of unfinished projects here. This one was for Folktale Week last year. I never really finished it, but I suppose I will at some point. I've got the undercoat, and then many more layers will go on top in order to get this completed. Here's one where I've used a base of acrylic ink, and then I've used Neo Arts over the top. All of this detail, again, unfinished, but all of this detail is Neo Art, and that's how you can work on it. I've used negative space as well here. I suppose at some point I'll finish this, but I don't know. Sometimes I get bored of things, or I lose momentum, or I'm having a sick day and then I just never get back to it. But it's okay to have that. I still keep these, and I will come to them eventually, I guess. Here are some backgrounds that I've done. I don't think these were leftover paint. These were intentional backgrounds. So really nice textures. Here's one where I've wiped away the acrylic ink, so it creates a really nice feel to it. This is hot press watercolor paper. And I also make zine backgrounds. So if you've watched either Naomi Tipping or Sarah Dyer or many others, you will have seen them making zines out of a folded sheet of paper. And I've also shared one on my YouTube channel before, which I will link for you in the description box below. So I use acrylic inks to create a background like this, just blobbinate, as Sophie McPike would say. These are just prep sheets that I can then use for a zine afterwards. And this is an example of where we've got the background. So here's the background, and then you work over it in acrylic ink as well, creating more textures and more pattern. And you can see how one side of the zine is developing and the other side is not yet developed as well. Speaking of zines, let's see some more zines that are more complete. Here's one where I've used a very similar background to this. So if you can see, the background is very, very, very similar to that one. And then I've drawn over it in all sorts of mediums. In pencil, in acrylic marker, I've got Posca on here. I've got wax pencil, yeah. So you can really create fun things like this with acrylic inks. And because it's really liquid, it's really easy to work with. Here's another one I did with friends. Lots and lots of materials thrown at it, mostly acrylic ink, and then a little bit of pencil and marker over the top. Here's another. I really love this one. We used prompts again for this one, and I've also got a little bit of metallic paint on here. Here's what this looks like opened out. So painted it flat like this and then folded it up. This one is on my YouTube channel. It's one of the few finished pieces. This is a zine that I made in an orange session. Acrylic ink background, and then all sorts of materials on top. Marker pens, pencils, crayons. Again, throw the whole bucket at it. It's really fun to do. Here's some more zines. This is just a floral one with just acrylic ink and crayon. New colors, I think. And here's some more that I made in a session with Sarah Dyer. These sessions are on her Patreon. I painted the base with the acrylic ink, and then we made little characters to go inside the zine. So you can see here the background. And then this one is on, I think it was watercolor paper, this one. So you can see the variety of things that can be done with acrylic inks. But there's also one more way in which you can use it, which I don't, but very many people love to use it in that way. So I've got my acrylic inks here, and I've got this sheet of watercolor paper. It's important to use nice thick watercolor paper for this. The paper will warp no matter what you do because we're going to use a lot of water on it. So I'm going to paint an area here with just plain water. I'm going to really wet the paper, and you can see that it's really, really damp. And then I'm going to use acrylic ink and just drop bits of acrylic ink all over the paper randomly. You can think about a color palette for this, or you can just wing it as I have done. And then you move the paper and move the acrylic ink around. This is a really fun way of creating an abstract piece, and then you can turn it into something else. You can use a background, you can cut it up and use it for collage, you can do all sorts of stuff with this. I can add a little bit more water to move the inks a little bit more. I can paint an area and make it more fluid. Different inks move differently. Liquitex, because it's more liquid, will spread a little bit more than some of the other inks, but you can add more water or more fluid medium to them to make them a little bit more watery, and then they'll work a little bit better. You can also work in layers. You can wait for this to dry, or you can use a drying tool. So you can rotate it and figure out which direction you want to move it in and which direction you want to be up. And then paint part of the section again in water. Just water over the top to help the ink move. Add more ink and work in layer after layer after layer after layer. And then once it's fully dried, you can do things like, in this case, I'm using a dip pen to add a little bit more spikiness to those trees on the horizon. It gives you a much finer line than a brush would, and it gives you a more opaque line than a brush marker would. You can also use pencil over the top, as I've done here, and I've just left it at this because I feel like it's a nice picture on its own. It's not my style of work. I would probably add rocks in the front here, put a dog on it, and then make it a little bit more me. But this is another style in which you can use acrylic inks. If you look at Furry Little Peach's work, she starts off with an acrylic ink background, using this dropper technique to create a little bit of variation. It's very interesting work. You can also use acrylic inks on a jelly plate. I haven't done so yet, but when I do so in the future, I will definitely show you that. One of my subscribers did ask me if I've used watercolor or gouache with acrylic inks. No, I have not, because when I use acrylic inks, I use them because I want the paint to stay where it should be and not really move around. And watercolor and gouache are both water soluble. I may use them on the top coat of something, but I am unlikely to mix them with acrylic ink because I'm just using acrylic ink for a singular purpose, if you will. The other question was how to avoid muddiness, and that is the same with any medium. Use a limited palette, try and clean your brush often, but also wait for layers to dry and then paint on top of them. The thing with acrylic ink is because you can be opaque on top of underneath layers, you can correct mistakes very easily. But muddiness often happens when you use too many colors. All of the colors mixed together will just create black or brown. But if you use a limited number of colors, like when I showed you some of the swatches, for example, I started off with multiple colors. And then as I went on, because I was mixing them so much, they became just brown. So you can avoid this by using a limited palette, cleaning your brush often, and really thinking and being considered about how you're painting, what lines you're putting down. If you don't like it, just turn the page. Turn the page, start again, put it away, come back to it another day. I have so much unfinished work, as you've seen. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with working slowly either. I hope that you found this useful. Don't forget to hype, subscribe. It's completely free to do these things, to like, subscribe, and hype my video. Absolutely free to do. You can also join my free email list, use my affiliate links, and also watch the videos that I've recommended, as well as join my Patreon for any extras. There's a free tier as well as a paid tier, and I post fairly regularly. And YouTube thinks you'll like this video next. Thanks for watching. Bye!